Pray for me, would you? I got about 95% of the way through writing this, and I thought, is this a good idea? But as I mentioned a few weeks ago, if you were with us, one of the things I spent a lot of time doing while I was recovering from surgery last month was scrolling on the internet. When my brain was too foggy to read and my body too weak to hold a book like this, scrolling was how I passed the time. And one of the things that I particularly enjoyed was TikTok. And I thought that before it got banned forever, I should preach about it. That sounded like a great idea on Thursday afternoon. And to be upfront, my goal is not to convince you to use this platform, but merely to bring some perspective from the front. And so we can understand more deeply what's going on in the world and maybe even get some inspiration for our own journey, especially here on Easter where our task is searching for hope and meaning. But first, get a sense of where we are. How many of you know what TikTok is? How many of you use it as a user? 2.5 people just went. It's okay. Everything is welcome here. Let me help catch you up. Maybe you know from reading the news, TikTok is yet another social media company, think Instagram and Snapchat, but with some distinct differences. TikTok is essentially a video sharing app allowing any one of its 1 billion users, 100 million of which are here in the United States, to record, edit, and upload brief videos into a massive database that other users can see. Now, the creative possibilities here are really endless. You can add music to your video, you can change the background, you can add a filter that makes it look like you have purple hair, you can stitch other things together into a compilation, but that's not really the important bit. What makes this platform really distinct is the user experience of watching the videos. Now, it's not like YouTube where you are searching for a particular video or particular type of content. How do I replace my refrigerator filter? You can do that, but that's not really how it's typically used. In TikTok, the videos are served to you. So you open your For You page, and I want you to go, as soon as you leave here, go find some Gen Z people and impress them that you know what the For You page is. It's like the home base of the app. And when you open it, it immediately shows you a video. And it could be anything. It could be a chef in New York City teaching you how to cook a steak, or a stay-at-home dad in Ohio singing a song about how he wished his 2-year-old had a prefrontal cortex. Or it could be a teenager in LA practicing a skateboarding trick and falling down over and over and over. And if you like that video, you watch it. And if you don't like it, you just swipe up, and guess what? It shows you another video. And it literally never ends. I've tested this. There is no end to the TikToks. And to be clear, these are not necessarily videos of people you know, like when you're scrolling on Facebook and it's your cousin and your friend from high school, right? It's mostly people you don't know. And it can feel totally random. But it is not random, right? It is driven by an enormous algorithm that's watching you watch the videos, okay? So it's seeing how long do you watch certain things and what kind of videos do you like and what do you follow and which do you just scroll by really fast. And through that, it's making a profile of you and your likely age and demographic and preferences and political leanings so it can show you more stuff that you want to watch. Which is all to say that ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok, isn't really a social media company. It's an artificial intelligence company, which is expertly mining user data to develop startlingly accurate portraits of every single one of its users. Which is why 535 US congresspeople, who typically can't even agree on anything, including whether or not it's a good idea to keep the government open, recently unanimously agreed that we've got to do something about this company. And some of their concern is legitimate. Is TikTok owned by a giant corporation with ties to the Chinese government? Yes. Is it a privacy risk for so many Americans to be using it with such regularity? Probably yes. Does it heavily redact content that the Chinese government would find objectionable, like discussion of political liberation movements, support for LGBTQI inclusion, and certain historical events which portray China in a negative light, evidence says yes. Does it contain objectionable content, like racism and sexism and conspiracy theories? Yes. And is there bullying and canceling and poor behavior and rude comments? Yes. Like the world itself, there are rough and shadowed places within social media that you are better off to avoid. And like holding community with actual humans, it too is imperfect in all the same ways that we are. And now you're asking them, why, Pastor Liz, are you talking to us about this? Why don't you just go tell us to go outside and take a walk and look at the sunset? Because it's also delightful. It is delightful. It is super creative, and it is hilarious, and it is diverse. And strangely, for something controlled so heavily by a communist nation, it has democratized so many things, like comedy and social cultural commentary, in ways that are really refreshing. Because it means you no longer need to work your behind off for 1 or 2 decades to make it onto Saturday Night Live, or to become an opinion columnist at the New York Times before a lot of people are able to listen to what you have to say. You can do it now. The experience of using it is like having been suddenly empowered to stick your head through the wall and to listen in on 1,000 conversations at 1,000 different dining room tables across the world. And through those to learn and to get new ideas and to be surprised and to have your feathers ruffled and to laugh and to feel a little bit less alone. It's also where millions and millions and millions of young people are spending their time being shaped socially and culturally. And I really want to be there for that. We say we care about that, but I want to be there for that. Instead of telling them that's unhealthy or unnecessary, I want to just show up and look around and join the discussion, and to see what wisdom I might lend to that endeavor rather than just critique it from the outside. Maybe we can do it better together. That's what the church has always believed. But I also just love it. I just love it. It's fun. It's funny. I could spend a lot of time on my couch watching it. And by far my favorite part of the experience is that it's like an unfolding conversation that includes millions of people. Like someone will make a video and someone else will stitch that video. You're learning all the vocabulary today, right? For You page for stitching things. Just throw this out there and you're out in the world. Stitching to the original video, which means appending their own response to the first video, and so on and so on. And like waves on the ocean, you can watch these conversations arise and move and change and then pass away. And there are amazing discussions going on in this platform about what it means to be anti-racist, and about body positivity, and about gender equity, and all sorts of stuff. There's such interesting questions you might never have thought to ask. How are black fans experiencing the new Beyonce album, Cowboy Carter, differently than white fans are? Because they are. How is that different, and what does it mean? How are millennial parents experiencing the economic pressures of care costs differently than Gen X parents? They are. And they're talking about it on there. It's all there. And while I was preparing to talk to you about this today, I realized that one of the reasons I like it so much is because it replicates to a certain degree the conversation that I feel unfolds in preaching. Okay? Like every week, there's this text, this biblical text, and I stitch that, like you got the original text and we read aloud, and then I stitch that to my own commentary, from my own point in history, from my own cultural context and personal experience. And then you take that, you stitch that together with your own experience. Maybe you're summarizing this over lunch with a friend later, and it's a conversation, right? And then just like TikTok, by Tuesday or so, it dies out, and nobody can remember what I said or what you said or what the original thing was about, and then we start again. It's so dynamic. Like I was thinking about our text today, this interesting post-resurrection story from Luke, and how I want to stitch it together with these thoughts I've been having about social media. Like, isn't that cool that we can do that with the scriptural text? Now, I always thought this seemed like kind of a strange story. And if we were reading it all together from one gospel, this is from Luke, we know this happens right after that very famous story about Jesus' appearance to the disciples who are walking on the road to Emmaus. Does anyone remember that one? There's 2 disciples right there on the road back home after the crucifixion. They're super bummed out about it. They run into Jesus, hey! and they don't know it's Jesus. So they kind of talk to him for a while about everything that's happened, and when they get where they're going, they invite Jesus in for dinner, and he joins them, and when they break bread together, they recognize that it's him. And then those disciples go back to Jerusalem to tell all the other disciples what they saw. And this story that we just heard this morning happens right after that. Jesus appears to those disciples, and they're kind of freaked out about it. Did you notice that? They're like, oh, it's a ghost. What do we do? And he says, no, look at this. I'm flesh and bone. And also, can someone please get me some breakfast? Apparently it's very difficult work coming back to life and beaming around all the land, right? He eats with them, and he talks with them, and he wishes them peace, and then he calls them witnesses. And I've heard this story many times, and I kind of hear it a little bit differently every time I've read it. And this time I was sort of thinking about our lives in the virtual world and how we can learn to live them well because they're not going away. And I was thinking about how the disciples' experience of Jesus after the resurrection reflects some of the same challenges we have of living in the virtual world. They do. I'm going to tell you about it right now. They would very much recognize some of the challenges that we have today. So first there's this idea that Jesus appears and he needs his friends to know that he is flesh and blood. Do you notice this? All the post-resurrection appearances, Jesus comes and he needs them to know that he's flesh and blood. They think he's a ghost, but he is quick to reassure them that he's look, touch this, it's my body. He's quick to eat with them and to do embodied things with them. And I take that to be Jesus providing a corrective to a potential pitfall, which would have been for the disciples to believe that the experience of the resurrection was completely otherworldly, with no bearing on this world. Does that make sense? Jesus' post-resurrection appearances all indicate that a life lived in the way of the risen Christ is meant to relate quite directly to this life, to this world, and to the flesh and blood things that we're doing every day. Having pulled back the curtain to show life beyond life, Jesus then sticks around to confirm that the sacred path is to live in a way that invites conversation between these two realities, not in a way that ignores one while pining for the other. Right? Although many people believe this, I think it is not true that Christians should just be waiting to beam out of this reality into a more heavenly one, but they should be living in this reality with an awareness of that one. Jesus models that it's essential to attend to matters of body and of food and of drink and of relationships in this life while being aware all those things are shot through with rays of eternal life. It's both and. And we're meant to apply that in our own spiritual lives. And maybe it's also good guidance for living in the virtual world. Our digital experiences can be rich with meaning and creativity and exploration. But they should also relate in some way to our flesh and blood experiences, to our real world relationships and pursuits. If we fall too far down the rabbit hole of virtual activity, such that our interactions there no longer inform or are no longer informed by our real life, then maybe we have become unbalanced. I think we all know this is true. While you might think it's terrible to spend hours on TikTok, maybe your internet vice is the New York Times app. That's an app too, and it is selling you something. And maybe you find while you are reading there so many things that make you just despair of the world and its citizens, right? To the extent that you're ignoring the fact that it's a lovely spring day and your neighbors are out weeding their garden. If you have that experience, it might mean it's time to rebalance. Take a walk, bake some bread, hug a friend, right? We have to keep our feet on the ground in this world while keeping in conversation with the broader world, both secular and sacred. That's good spiritual discipline. Another thing I think about related to the disciples' experience is about intention and attention. About intention. I notice that whenever Jesus comes back, he doesn't just hang out. There's always some sort of teaching component to his presence there. He tries to help the disciples understand what's happened and what it means. He's always saying, see, this is what I meant. And see, this is what Scripture was talking about. And see, this is how it all relates. And see, this is what's going to happen. I think that's really important because he's inviting them to be aware of what's at play and what's at stake in their situation. Inviting them to enter into a never-ending cycle of action and reflection. And I think we do well to follow that lead, to think about what things mean and who's involved and what's important. I have a strong feeling that our broader culture is eager to convince us that we are alone, that there is much to fear, and that our only power comes from consumption. But as people of faith, we don't let that algorithm control what we believe and do. We push back. We consider what things mean. We think about whose witness we trust. We listen for the voices of the oppressed missing from our conversation. We test our sources and search for other perspectives. We move about thoughtfully and consider things deeply, applying always the perspective our faith gives us about God's unbounded grace and love. I think that's the work of faith, though you don't always see Christians practicing that publicly. I wish we did. And I think the same goes for our online lives. When I use social media, sometimes I simply let myself be entertained. That's fine. But I also try to stop periodically and consider what's at stake. What is this doing to me, and who's doing it? What am I being sold? What vision of heaven am I buying into here? Whose is the dominant voice and who is being left out? I think that's an important further step that helps me to remain grounded while exploring all these other worlds that are very much with us. I also think there's something about attention. It occurs to me that the disciples had to be careful what they paid attention to in the days following Jesus' death. To look around at the whole scene would be to find a preponderance of evidence that hope was lost, that peace was dead, that the empire had won, and that nothing that they had done mattered in the least. But Jesus' followers continued to look for hope, not under every rock and shell in Galilee, but in the places they knew it was likely to appear. In community, in breaking bread, in a boat on the sea at sunrise. And I think this is a powerful lesson for we who continue to look for hope in a world that often seems out of control, that we have to be careful what we pay attention to, what we engage with. Do we make choices about our focus, or do we allow our attention to be co-opted by other things by default? Of course, the disciplines of prayer and of song and of worship, those are all disciplines of attention. They're all investments of attention that we make in building a robust relationship with God and a robust connection to hope that keeps us grounded in this world. And we do well to continue to return to those. And I think the same is true online. As I mentioned earlier, in the massive TikTok universe, there are some dark things. Evidence that humans can be cruel and thoughtless. And there is a way to be aware of that without giving it the benefit of my gaze and engagement, is something I've learned. We must really be thoughtful about what we're giving clicks to and checking in with ourselves and making sure the hope-rich foci in our lives are the main recipients of our limited time and energy. And just one final thing, I know this is already so long. If this were a TikTok video, it would have like 9 parts. But this is it. We may not feel in control of the mechanism all the time. Whether that is the digital companies with which we interact, or the cogs that turn this massive machine of culture or geopolitics. If we don't feel control of what's going on with our bodies, we don't feel in control of our environment, we may not ever feel like we're in control. But neither did the disciples. They lived in a world that was pretty out of control too, and yet they were witnesses to hope and to God's presence in a really transforming way. What they decided to do with that was that they went on to build this beautiful platform, the church, through which people could encounter God's grace. They decided to be content creators of transformation and of conversion and of gospel good news. And I think the good news for us is that we're witnesses too. We may not feel in control all the time, but we can control our contributions to this moment into this world, into this platform. We can choose to put beautiful, hopeful, faithful, just things out there and trust God to be at work in and through them, just as we see and trust God to be at work in all things. We can do this. They were the witnesses to that good news in their time, and we are the witnesses to it in our own. The world is waiting for a word of hope, and the clock is ticking, and we get to choose how to respond. So I hope this encourages you to go forth and to create in a way that is meaningful to you, knowing that God's grace goes with you always to every corner. We ask that God bless these things, the God that has created, redeemed, and sustained us all. Amen.